especially if you work with minority or disadvantaged populations. What is the power dynamic? Your position as a university-affiliated researcher. One thing to do is always make sure that you are welcomed and wanted and invited by the community. And so that means that when you first visit a community, you spend a lot of time meeting with all people who are in positions of power and influence, and really just meeting with everyone, explaining your project, what it is you're doing. And I ask a very simple question, which is, what's happening to your language, and what would you like? And I get different answers. Some communities want the elders' stories to be recorded, or they want a book in their language, or they may want something else. So I try to be responsive. Besides, I have something I would like to collect, but I don't make that front and center. I ask the community, what would you like? And then I find people in the community who are willing to work with me, people like Anthony, who understood the importance of recording the language. I also have always included community members as co-authors. So all of the talking dictionaries I create are co-authored by community members. In recent years, all of my peer-reviewed academic papers also have community authors. Sometimes academic journals don't understand. They're like, what do you mean this person doesn't have an email? How can they be a co-author when they don't have an email? So say, well, they are a co-author, right? I wouldn't publish this work without their name on it, right? The knowledge belongs to them. So recognizing the ownership of the knowledge, right? Including people as co-authors, making sure that if there are any benefits, they flow back to the community. I also, in every funded grant that I've ever had over the years, I've always included funding for what I call reciprocal expeditions. So I don't just go to India to study their language. I have funding to invite them to come and visit me and interact with my students in my community. So I think all those things are important. They don't erase the power dynamic, but they acknowledge it and find ways to empower and include people as much as possible. But thank you for your question.
Thank you for your answer. That was a really interesting response. That gave me thinking about a lot of things.
Yes?
Are there any cases in which languages that disappeared are now being brought back to life by members of the community who have knowledge of something recorded?
Yes, cases where a language disappeared in the sense that it had no living speakers and brought back. Yes, there's a local example. The Miamia language, which is spoken in a large territory, including parts of Illinois, Ohio, Oklahoma. It's a Native American language. It had no native speakers at one point in the 20th century, but it had a history of some dictionaries and some recorded documentation. I don't know if it had sound recordings or not. It didn't have sound recordings. But the community, a linguist based in the community, Darrell Baldwin, and another linguist, Wesley Leonard, and the whole community kind of got together and they really carried out an audacious social experiment, which is to raise some of the children in the community speaking the language. So essentially creating a new generation of native speakers. And what they speak is not identical to what was spoken before. Of course, languages evolve, but it is a case of successfully reintroducing a language that had no speakers based on written documentation. So yes, it can happen. I got to visit the Isle of Man some years ago. Manx was declared extinct in 1979 when the last speaker died. What really happened was that the language kind of went into hiding. There were no native speakers, but there were people who loved the language and who pursued knowledge of the language, but they had to do it kind of clandestinely because it was frowned upon. But then in the 1990s, the community got together and they founded a Manx immersion school. And I visited that school, and there is now a generation of children who speak Manx all day, every day. And so the language is coming back. So it's possible, but it takes an unimaginable amount of, I think, willpower and love for the language. Yes, Robbie.
I was wondering if there are sort of similar strategies or different strategies for offering support for endangered language conservation versus conservation or restoration of endangered material culture traditions, like you were speaking about with the Benar community.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm kind of new to the material culture conservation. I've always been interested in things people make, so whether it's baskets or canoes, and I always want to sit down with the person making it and just kind of watch them do it and learn about it. Recently, I've become affiliated with UNESCO, and one of UNESCO's kind of global missions is to bring recognition and hopefully resources to intangible cultural heritage. So that includes all of the skills and arts that I mentioned, textiles, but also things like oral epic storytelling to traditional architecture, right? All of those things, it's recognized that not only that those things should be preserved because the community wants them and because they're the best possible solution in that environment. Like when aluminum boats came into the Bana community, everyone hated them, but there just aren't enough trees to make the traditional canoes. So they're grudgingly using these aluminum boats, but at the same time, they really don't like them at all. And they complain, you know. So the newer invented thing does not necessarily replace the thing that has been produced by millennia of cultural genius and adaptation, right? So we have to kind of get rid of that idea that newer is better, right? And then is there room to support, you know, how can we support the artists and the skilled artisans who create these beautiful things? You have to create a market for it. And so that has become part of the ethos of sustainable tourism and microfinance, and many different stakeholders are looking at this question of how do you support people to continue doing the incredible thing that they've been doing for generations, but now it's becoming difficult, you know, because people think about the labor that goes into weaving a basket and the fact that you could just buy a plastic bag instead, right, which would be bad for the planet and bad for the culture, but you could just do that, right? So how do you incentivize that labor and that expertise and support it? It's a huge question. I think it cuts across all the humanities and social sciences. Yes? Jasper.
Thank you. Throughout the presentation, you've mentioned music repeatedly. I wanted to ask if music can be, or frequently is, a tool for language preservation.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Jasper. I'm not an ethnomusicologist. I've had the privilege of working from time to time with ethnomusicologists, and what they do is utterly fascinating to me. They'll go into a community and they will find the talent, the people who can play instruments, who can sing, and they'll gather them together and learn about their traditions and make recordings. And yeah, music is absolutely a crucial vehicle for transmitting language, transmitting knowledge about the environment. I gave an example of the tuna fish song that is also a mini botany lesson. And it's endangered because people are all around the world are drawn to TikTok. But maybe the platform itself, TikTok can host indigenous music. I put a bunch of stuff up on my YouTube channel, and I know some people in these communities, indigenous musicians, who are platforming their own material. And so I think the medium is not just a threat, it's also an opportunity. Again, how do we incentivize it? How do you get people exposed to these incredible art forms and get them interested and make them want to listen to it? But yeah, music, ethnomusicologists will tell a similar story about how many different important genres that are completely oral, that have never been recorded, that are now vanishing. They're not being successfully transmitted to the younger generation, and they feel a sense of urgency about that. Thank you. Yes?
So I have a related question, maybe for Robbie as well, that you were talking about sort of finding a market for the artisans and platforms for the music. What about the the biological knowledge. I mean, the knowledge of the environment that is so critical. I mean, what's the bridge between that and, you know, policymakers? Or,
Thank you, Nancy. That's a great question. So how do we support the biodiversity knowledge? You know, I'm going to turn this question over to Robbie Hart, who's an ethnobotanist, but I will just say that even as I have no training in botany or biology, but I'm always just awestruck, you know, when I'm in the Koro Aka community in India, you know, we could be just walking down to me it just looks like a pathway overgrown with a bunch of green stuff, you know, but my Bana friend will say, oh yeah, this plant, you know, this is for treating burns, this is for treating constipation, this is for headache, you know, every plant. There's no plant that is a stranger to him or is not useful or known. So I want to hear from Robbie Hart, our ethnobotanist from the Missouri Botanical Garden, about this question.
I think that's a really great question. And I guess one of the things I want to focus on is just that sort of knowledge of plant identity. So David mentioned this. You know, this is an active site of knowledge production. New plant species are being discovered and described every day. And so I think at the Botanical Garden, you know, we're giving things Latin names and scientific descriptions. But as David said, in places where people live, the people who live in those places tend to have knowledge about the environment. Often they'll know these species. They have pre-existing names for them. We've gotten a lot of questions as botanists about, is your field still relevant? Like, can't artificial intelligence just, you know, it can recognize a plant, right? What's the importance of having a botanist there? But if these things have never been described, that information is not there. It's not in the world knowledge base, no matter how good your technology is. And so I think incorporating speakers of local languages as taxonomists, sometimes we call them parataxonomists, but they really are, you know, people who are giving names to the living world as part of that effort is something that, you know, that we do all the time when we're doing plant collection, but it's just necessary and is just still a very active documentation imperative, basically.
I'll share an anecdote. When I arrived on Futuna Island with a team of botanists from the New York Botanical Garden, one of the first people we met was this gentleman, Takaronga Kuautonga. And he said, why are you here? Why have you come? And Michael Balick said, well, we're going to do a floristic survey. We're going to collect all the plants we can on this island and, you know, try to identify them. And he said, without pausing even a second, he said, oh, we know all the plants on our island. And it was true. They do know all the plants on their island. Botanists didn't know all the plants on their island, but they did. So yeah, that's the knowledge base is out there. It just needs to be acknowledged. Yes, Diana.
Have you encountered some of the hurdles related to technology, some of the damage that technology itself can do in the communities where these languages are disappearing rapidly? I can give you an example from a language that's not endangered, Romanian, that we speak. The fact that Romanian has several letters that are different from the basic alphabet that we know. Those things are disappearing in the writing of younger generations because you can't find them in the computer and you need a special type of processor to do those types of things.
Yeah, there are definitely technological barriers, and there are ways in that mainstream technology, which is geared towards English, often doesn't support minority languages and their unique writing systems. You know, so this is something that, you know, we have to collectively think about, because the technology can accommodate those languages. It's just that someone has to be aware and to make the effort. But yeah, so technology is not necessarily friendly. It's not a friendly environment for minority languages, but it can be if we deploy it correctly. I've been doing some work recently on this. There's kind of a discussion going on around what's called inclusive AI. You know, how do we make AI inclusive, not only of languages, but of alternative worldviews that are expressed in different languages and cultures. Because it's been pointed out that the current AI language models, even if you ask them a question in French or Vietnamese, they're going to come back to you with a kind of Anglo-centric worldview and assumptions translated into French or Vietnamese. So they're not culturally inclusive in the sense of including different worldviews and ideas and different ways of human interaction. They're basically just English translated into other languages. So inclusive AI is, I think, a very exciting emerging field that is going to look at those problems and try to come up with some solutions. Yes?
So I wanted to ask you, where do languages or dialects go to die? I know that there has to have to be governments with big resources to be able to put them in a repository.
Where do languages go?
What happens in the United States?
So there are a number of international archives where I've put a lot of my recordings in an archive in the Netherlands. There's one in Germany. Is there one in the U.S. currently?
Yeah,
We have Christine has expertise in this area.
the California Language Archive is not just languages of California. They archive languages from around the world. There's an archive at the University of North Texas that focuses largely on archiving language materials. So not just texts, notes, but audio, video, other types of publications and derivatives from South Asian languages.
Yep.
So there are archives that are kind of global, so to
Yep.
speak, in their reach, and then there are other ones that are more focused on sets of languages or parts of the world.
Professional archives that meet certain standards, and we hope that they have some longevity. Who knows? But it's hoped. In addition to archiving my stuff, I put a lot of my stuff, when speakers give me permission, I just put it up on my YouTube channel, and I find that it attracts a lot of interest and viewership. So, but we're in the digital age, or the digital dark ages, as Gary Simon said, and every successive medium of recording information is more fragile than the one that preceded it. So digital is more fragile than paper, which is more fragile than clay, and papyrus, which is more fragile than stone. So, we don't have any assurance that our digital data will be around for a long time. So, well, thank you all for being such a great audience. I tend to judge the success of an event by the quality of the questions, and the questions have been great. So thank you so much, and thank you for hosting me, and I wish you all a very happy International Studies Day and continued success in all of your endeavors.